Sergeant Marcus Kane stood at the edge of Outpost Zeta 7's landing pad and watched humanity's last evacuation shuttle disappear into the blood-red sky of Creshnell. The plasma trail stretched thin and faded, and with it went Marcus's last chance at survival. He was supposed to be on that shuttle. His name had been on the manifest. He checked it 3 times. But a communication error had delayed him by exactly 6 minutes. 6 minutes spent helping a wounded private reach the aid station. 6 minutes that had seemed important at the time. 6 minutes that now meant the difference between escape and being stranded on a hostile alien world with enemy forces closing in from 3 directions. The distant thunder of Kresh artillery was getting closer. They were advancing faster than intelligence had predicted, which was why the evacuation had become a panic scramble instead of an orderly withdrawal. Marcus took a breath of Creshnell's thin atmosphere, breathable for humans but always leaving you feeling slightly oxygen-deprived, and made himself accept reality. No more shuttles were coming. No rescue missions for a single soldier accidentally left behind. The official paperwork would probably list him as missing, presumed KIA within a week. The Earth Alliance had evacuated, cut their losses, and moved on. He was 32 years old, a career soldier with 3 combat tours under his belt, and according to his service record, he was highly adaptable and tactically creative. Military euphemisms for will jury-rig solutions that technically violate protocol but usually work. He'd need every bit of that adaptability now. Marcus looked at his gear. 1 C-47 pulse rifle with 3 spare magazines, roughly 120 rounds total. 1 combat knife. Standard field kit including basic medical supplies, ration bars for 3 days, water purification tablets. A communication device currently displaying no signal, because the evacuation fleet had jumped to FTL and taken the relay satellite with them. His survival time, maybe 48 hours, maybe less if the Kresh found him quickly. The logical move would be to hide. Find a cave, wait for the occupation sweep to pass, then try to survive in the wilderness until what? There was no rescue coming, no way off this planet. Marcus turned and looked at Outpost Zeta 7. The small research station was damaged, walls pocked with artillery impacts, several sections collapsed, the main command tower listing at an angle that suggested compromised structural integrity. It was a ruin, but it was also defensible. Something cold and determined settled in Marcus's chest. If he was going to die on this planet, and statistically he almost certainly was, he'd do it on his terms. He'd make the Kresh work for it. He'd turn this abandoned outpost into a fortress and defend it with everything he had. Not because he had delusions about winning, because going down fighting beat hiding in a cave waiting to starve. Marcus entered the outpost through a breach in the outer wall, rifle ready even though he knew the position was abandoned. The interior was chaos, equipment left where it fell during the rushed evacuation, screens still displaying outdated tactical information, the smell of burnt circuitry and human fear. He spent the first hour on reconnaissance, checking every room, every corridor, every defensive position, making mental notes. The weapons systems were disabled, standard protocol to prevent captured equipment being turned against human forces. But disabled meant control systems were scrambled, not that the physical weapons were destroyed. Marcus had bypassed similar lockouts before. Power generation was damaged, but one fusion cell was still functioning at maybe 30% capacity. Enough for basic lighting and essential systems. Water recycling was intact in the eastern section. Food storage had been mostly cleared, but he found a sealed emergency cache, rations designed to feed 50 for 2 weeks. For one person, that was months if he was careful. The medical bay still had supplies, trauma kits, tissue regenerators, antibiotics, pain management drugs. Most importantly, the sensor array was partially functional. He could see approximately 10 kilometers in any direction, warning before attacks arrived. Marcus spent the rest of that first day working with manic energy. He started repairs on defensive walls using debris and salvaged materials. He identified 3 firing positions with excellent sight lines and clear fields of fire. He began work on the automated turrets. The control systems were encrypted, but the physical weapons were intact. He could rig manual controls. It would mean operating them himself, but manual was better than nothing. As Krishnal's sun set in colors Earth's sky never produced, deep reds and purples that made everything look hostile and alien, Marcus ate 1 ration bar, drank recycled water, and looked at the tactical displays showing enemy positions steadily advancing toward his location. They'd be here tomorrow, maybe the next day. Marcus checked his rifle one more time, counted his ammunition, and allowed himself a bitter smile. The Earth Alliance had forgotten he existed, would list him as a casualty statistic, would move on, but he'd make it count. When the Kresh came for this outpost, they'd remember the human who refused to just die quietly. He slept fitfully that night in the command center, rifle within arm's reach, dreaming of the evacuation shuttle disappearing into the red sky while he stood below watching his last chance at survival leave without him. The Kresh scouts arrived 3 days later, exactly as Marcus predicted. He watched them through the sensor array, a dozen warriors moving cautiously through the abandoned human positions surrounding the outpost. The Kresh were imposing even by alien standards. 8 feet tall with 4 arms, heavily muscled, covered in natural armor plating that made them look like evolution's perfect killing machines. Their society was built around military conquest, every individual raised for combat from childhood. Marcus let them approach. He'd spent 3 days preparing, turning the outpost into a maze of firing positions, fallback routes, and improvised traps using unexploded ordnance he'd found in the damaged sections. He'd memorized every angle, every sight line, every piece of cover. When the Kresh were close enough, clustered together examining the main entrance, clearly thinking the outpost was abandoned, Marcus opened fire from an elevated position with perfect line of sight. His first burst took down 3 warriors before they could respond. Military training and 3 combat tour made his aim precise, his target selection tactical. He aimed for the commander first, recognized by better armor, then the communications specialist, then the largest warrior who was probably their close combat expert. The remaining Kresh scattered, seeking cover, trying to locate the shooter. Marcus was already moving, relocating to his secondary position while they wasted ammunition shooting at where he'd been. The firefight lasted maybe 15 minutes. When it ended, 6 Kresh warriors were dead, and the survivors were falling back to report to their main force. Marcus had taken no hits. His positioning and preparation had given him overwhelming tactical advantage despite being outnumbered. He used the time before their inevitable return to improve his defenses further, to relocate traps, to rest and prepare for the next engagement. The Kresh returned 2 weeks later with a full assault force, maybe 60 warriors, proper military formation, using suppression fire and attempting to flank his positions. Marcus made them pay for every meter they advanced. He'd spent 2 weeks turning the outpost into a killing field. Approaches were trapped with explosives. Sight lines overlapped to create crossfire zones. Defensive positions were connected by covered routes that let him relocate without exposure. The battle lasted 4 hours. Marcus expended half his remaining ammunition and took shrapnel in his left shoulder from a near miss, but he held. When the Kresh finally retreated, they'd lost nearly 40 warriors. Marcus had successfully fallen back to his secondary defensive line, giving up the outer positions but maintaining the core of the outpost. He treated his wound with medical supplies, popped antibiotics, and allowed himself 4 hours of sleep before starting work on his next defensive layer. The pattern established itself over the following months. The Kresh would attack with increasing force and sophistication, learning from previous engagements. Marcus would defend with improvised tactics and absolute determination, making them pay in casualties for every position he eventually had to yield. He retreated deeper into the outpost complex. Each defensive line was more elaborate than the last because he'd had time to prepare it. The Kresh were pushing him back through sheer numbers, but they weren't overwhelming him. He was trading ground for their blood at unsustainable rates. Marcus lost track of exactly how many Kresh warriors he'd killed. Hundreds, certainly, maybe more. His outpost became infamous in their military. The position that should have fallen in days had held for months, defended by a single human who refused to die or surrender. They started calling him Death's Shadow in their language, a title Marcus learned from intercepted communications he taught himself to partially decode. He didn't feel legendary. He felt exhausted, operating on fury and stubbornness and the absolute refusal to let the universe win. Every day he held this position was a day he wasn't dead, wasn't captured, wasn't defeated. It was his final middle finger to the Earth Alliance that had forgotten him and the Kresh forces trying to kill him. 6 months after the evacuation, Marcus was holding approximately 30% of the original outpost. He'd weathered 17 major assaults and countless smaller probes. His body was covered in scars, some healed cleanly, others leaving permanent marks. His ammunition was down to maybe 50 rounds. His food supplies were getting critically low. He knew rationally that the end was coming. Eventually, the Kresh would commit enough forces to overwhelm his remaining defenses, or he'd run out of ammunition, or simple exhaustion would slow him enough to take a killing shot. But he'd held for 6 months. 6 months alone on a hostile planet, defending a ruined outpost through improvisation and determination. If this was where he died, it was one hell of a final stand. Then the sensors picked up something new. Marcus was doing his evening perimeter check, routine that had become ritual, when the long-range detection system started displaying contacts. Multiple large vessels dropping out of FTL in orbit. His heart rate spiked. For one wild moment, he thought maybe Earth Alliance had come back for him. The ship's signatures were wrong. Not human vessels, not Kresh either. Something else. Something new. Marcus pulled up his salvaged observation equipment and watched as landing craft descended in perfect formation. The ships were elegant and deadly, organic curves mixed with crystalline structures that caught the light in ways that hurt to look at directly. Advanced technology that made both human and Kresh engineering look primitive. The soldiers that emerged were like nothing Marcus had ever seen in person, though he recognized them from intelligence briefings. Shelkin. Tall and imposing with silver skin that shifted through chromatic patterns. 4 arms that moved with coordinated grace. A reputation as one of the most formidable military powers in this region of space. Marcus had no idea what the Shelkin were doing on Kreshnel, but he watched them establish a perimeter with professional precision. They weren't invading, they were reclaiming, setting up permanent structures like they planned to stay. Over the next days, Marcus intercepted enough communications to piece together the situation. Kreshnel was apparently disputed territory, claimed by the Shelkin Empire centuries ago, then abandoned, then occupied by the Kresh who'd thought the Shelkin weren't returning. They'd been wrong. The Shelkin were here to reclaim their old territory, and they'd brought their Empress with them, which suggested this was politically significant. Marcus watched the Shelkin forces advance through the region, systematically eliminating Kresh resistance with superior technology and tactics. The Kresh forces that had been trying to kill him for 6 months now had a much bigger problem. The Shelkin were moving toward his outpost. Marcus looked at his defensive positions, at the fortress he'd built from debris and desperation, at the place he defended for half a year with blood and exhausted determination. He'd held this position against the Kresh for 6 months. If the Shelkin wanted it, they'd have to take it from him. He was done surrendering anything to anyone. Marcus spent 3 days watching the Shelkin forces advance. They were overwhelmingly effective against the Kresh, superior technology turning what should have been hard-fought battles into systematic elimination of enemy positions. The Kresh forces that had been intermittently assaulting his outpost were now falling back, trying to establish defensive lines. It wasn't working. Marcus knew the Shelkin would reach his outpost soon. He could see their forward scouts already examining the perimeter. He made his final preparations, set new traps, positioned his remaining ammunition for maximum effectiveness, accepted that this might be his final battle. When the Shelkin advance reached his outpost, Marcus opened fire. His first shots were precision, taking out forward scouts with headshots before they could report. Then he engaged the main force with everything he had. The remaining automated turrets he jury-rigged trapped approaches that channeled them into kill zones, suppressing fire from multiple positions. The Shelkin were professional military. They took casualties and fell back, clearly shocked to encounter serious resistance at what should have been an abandoned human position. Marcus used the pause to relocate. The second assault was more cautious. The Shelkin used drones to scout, employed suppressing fire, coordinated their advance. Marcus adapted, used traps held in reserve, employed every bit of defensive depth he'd built up. He wasn't trying to win. He was trying to make them pay. Then something unexpected happened. The Shelkin assault stopped mid-advance. Their forces held position, neither attacking nor retreating. Marcus could see they were receiving new orders, reorganizing. An hour later, a different group arrived. These soldiers were elite, better equipment, movements suggesting extensive combat experience, and with them came someone clearly in command. She was taller than the other Shelkin, her silver skin displaying colors Marcus hadn't seen on regular soldiers, deep golds and royal purples that seemed to signify high status. Her forearms moved with absolute confidence. Every soldier deferred to her. Marcus's partial translation of intercepted communications confirmed it. Empress Kelshara, the ruler of the Shelkin Empire, was personally at his outpost. He watched through his scope as the Empress and her elite guard moved through his outer defensive positions. After a moment, he activated the outpost's external speakers. "This is Sergeant Marcus Kane, Earth Alliance Marine Corps. I'm the only defender of this position. I've held it for 6 months against Kresh forces. If you want this territory, you'll have to take it from me." The silence that followed was profound. Marcus could see movement among the Shelkin forces, surprise rippling through their ranks. The Empress's silver skin shifted rapidly through colors that clearly indicated strong emotion. When she spoke again, her voice carried genuine curiosity. One human, alone for 6 months, against Kresh military forces. Affirmative. This is unprecedented. Our intelligence shows this outpost sustained major damage and was abandoned. There are no supply lines, no reinforcements, no support. How do you survive? Carefully, Marcus said, feeling grim satisfaction at the understatement. He could see the Empress consulting with advisors, animated discussion clearly indicating debate and disbelief. Finally, she spoke again. "Sergeant Kane, I wish to verify your claims. Will you accept a ceasefire while we investigate this position?" "What's in it for me?" "Information, understanding, possible alternatives to dying in this outpost." Marcus considered. He was exhausted. Down to maybe 30 rounds. He knew he couldn't hold against a full Shelkin assault, but there was something in the Empress's tone, not mockery, not disbelief, something like respect. "Ceasefire accepted," he said, "but I'm maintaining defensive positions." Understood. What followed was the strangest experience of Marcus's 6 months on Kreshnal. The Shelkin forces entered his defensive positions carefully, professionally. Not as invaders, as investigators. They examined every repair, every trap, every defensive layer. They counted the Kresh bodies that marked successful defensive actions. They analyzed battle damage and cross-referenced it with intelligence on Kresh assault tactics. The Empress herself walked through his defensive lines. her forearms occasionally touching repairs or examining fortifications, her silver skin shifting through thoughtful colors. Marcus watched from his command position, rifle ready but not aimed, as they cataloged 6 months of desperate survival. Hours later, the Empress returned to speaking range. "Sergeant Marcus Kane, we have investigated your claims. The evidence is conclusive. A single human defender has indeed held this position against sustained Kresh military assault for approximately 6 standard months." She paused, and her skin colors shifted to something warm and bright. "This is among the most impressive defensive actions I have encountered in 30 years of military command." "It wasn't about being impressive," Marcus said, his voice rough. "It was about not dying quietly." "There is nothing quiet about what you have accomplished here." The Empress gestured to encompass his defensive positions. "You have killed hundreds of enemy warriors. You have held territory that a full garrison would struggle to maintain. You have adapted and survived with no support. This is warfare distilled to its essential form, one warrior refusing to yield." She moved closer. "I wish to make you an offer. I wish to witness you in combat one final time. My forces will withdraw to observation distance. There is a Kresh remnant force in this region. I have ordered them to assault this outpost once more. I wish to see how you fight." Marcus stared at her. "You want me to fight for your entertainment?" "Not entertainment, documentation, understanding." Her skin colors were earnest, respectful. "Sergeant Kane, you have accomplished something that military scholars will study for generations. I wish to witness it directly, and I wish my warriors to witness it as well, to understand what is possible when a soldier refuses to accept defeat. And if I refuse, then we withdraw and you continue your defense. But the Kresh in this region are being systematically eliminated. Soon there will be no enemy left. This may be your final opportunity to demonstrate what you have survived." Marcus thought about 6 months of lonely warfare, about being forgotten by his own people while becoming legend to the Kresh. "When do they attack?" he asked. "Within 3 hours. Your forces will only observe." "You have my word as Empress." Marcus made his decision. If he was going to fight one more time, someone should see it. Someone should witness what Marcus Kane had survived. "I accept," he said, "but if I fall, I want my story recorded. I want someone to know I was here." "You have my word," the Empress said solemnly. "And Sergeant Kane, you will not fall. I have studied your preparations. You are far from finished fighting." The Shelkin forces withdrew to elevated observation positions. Marcus could see them setting up recording equipment, the Empress taking position with perfect sight lines to his entire defensive layout. For 6 months, he'd fought alone with no audience but the enemy trying to kill him. Now he had an audience of elite alien warriors and their Empress. He used the 3 hours to prepare, checked ammunition, down to maybe 200 rounds, verified traps and fallback positions, ate ration bars and drank recycled water. Then the Kresh came. Marcus spotted them on sensors, 3 dozen warriors, maybe more in reserve, everything the Kresh had left in this region. They advanced cautiously, using drones to scout. Marcus let them come, holding fire, waiting. When they reached his first kill zone, Marcus opened fire, not from his primary position, from secondary position they didn't know about, held in reserve for exactly this. His first burst dropped 3 warriors. Then he was moving, already relocating as return fire tore through the position he'd just left. The battle unfolded like deadly dance. Marcus used the defensive depth built over months, firing from one position, triggering traps to cover movement to next, using terrain he knew intimately. The Kresh adapted, pushed forward. Marcus fell back, making them pay for every meter. He took a round that grazed his leg, kept moving, down to maybe 100 rounds. The Kresh breached his third line. Marcus fell back to the command center, his final position. Multiple firing positions, overlapping fields of fire. His last trap, charges that would bring down the structure if they overran him. The final assault was brutal. Marcus met them with the last of his ammunition and every bit of skill learned in 3 tours, firing from one position then another, creating the illusion of multiple defenders, making them hesitate. He was down to his last magazine when he realized the Kresh assault was faltering. Too many casualties. Their attack was breaking. Marcus fired his last rounds, watched them retreat, then collapsed behind cover with his empty rifle. He'd held. One more time he'd held. From the observation positions he heard sounds his translator rendered as approval. War cries. Acknowledgement. Through his scope he saw the Empress standing, all 4 arms raised in salute. Her amplified voice carried across the valley, "Cease fire. All forces cease fire." The surviving Kresh stopped, confused. The Empress addressed them in their own language, then switched to English. "Sergeant Marcus Kane, by the authority of my position and in recognition of your extraordinary defensive action, I offer you sanctuary. You have earned the respect of the Shelkin Empire. Will you accept our protection?" Marcus slumped against the wall, rifle empty, body aching. "What does sanctuary mean?" He managed. "It means you are no longer alone. It means the Shelkin Empire recognizes your worth and offers you a place among us. It means your war is over, Sergeant Kane, unless you choose to continue it." Marcus looked at his empty rifle, at the defensive position he'd held for half a year, at the evidence of countless battles. He thought about the shuttle that left without him, the command that forgot he existed. Then he looked at the Shelkin forces, not as enemies but as witnesses to his stand. "I accept," he said, and felt something in his chest release. The weight he'd carried for 6 months, the fury that kept him alive, the refusal to surrender. It didn't disappear, but it transformed into something else. Relief. Recognition that he'd survived something that should have killed him. Shelkin medics entered his command center. The Empress followed, her silver skin displaying colors that seemed like admiration and respect. And Marcus finally allowed himself to believe his lonely war was over. 3 days later, Marcus woke in a Shelkin medical facility. His wounds were healed, not just treated but actually healed through technology that seemed impossible. For the first time in 6 months he wasn't in pain. The Empress visited him, alone except for 2 guards maintaining respectful distance. "Sergeant Kane, how do you feel?" "Like I slept for the first time in half a year. Your medical technology is remarkable. It is one of our proudest achievements." She settled into a chair. "I wish to discuss what happens next. I'm your prisoner. You are our guest, under sanctuary. You are free to leave whenever you choose, though I suspect you have nowhere to go currently." Marcus nodded. He'd checked. Earth Alliance had listed him as KIA 6 months ago. Officially he was dead. So what are my options? Many. You could remain with the Shelkin Empire. Your tactical skills are extraordinary. You could serve as instructor, advisor. Or you could request transport to human space when our ships return to that region. Or you could do nothing. Rest. Recover. All paths are open. What do you want from me? The Empress's skin shifted to warm colors. "I want you to understand what you accomplished. I have shared recordings of your defense with my military commanders. Already your tactics are being studied. Your improvisation, adaptability, absolute refusal to yield, these are lessons worth teaching." She leaned forward. "You were forgotten by your own command, left behind, given up for dead. And you transformed abandonment into legend through sheer determination. That is worth more than any decoration. That is inspiration." Over the following weeks, Marcus slowly reintegrated. The Shelkin treated him with remarkable respect. Warriors sought him out to discuss tactics. Commanders requested his input. He was valued in ways he'd never experienced. The Empress arranged for him to observe training, to share perspectives, to contribute to tactical development. One evening, sitting with the Empress in a private garden on the Shelkin command ship, Marcus asked, "Why does my survival matter so much to your people?" The Empress was quiet, skin shifting through contemplative patterns. "Because it is rare," Sergeant Kane. Rare to see a warrior who fights not for glory, but simply because yielding is unthinkable. Rare to witness someone transform absolute isolation into strength. Rare to see improvisation elevated to art form through necessity. She turned to look at him. Most warriors fight as part of a unit, drawing strength from companions. You fought utterly alone, with no support, no hope of relief. And you still fought with excellence. That is profound demonstration of what an individual can achieve when they refuse to accept defeat. I was scared the whole time. But fear is not weakness. Fighting despite fear is courage. You embodied courage in purest form, alone, afraid, facing impossible odds, still refusing to surrender. Months passed. Marcus healed physically and emotionally. He accepted a position as tactical consultant to the Shelkin military. He found himself, surprisingly, content. Then a human diplomatic vessel arrived. Among the delegation were military liaisons who recognized Marcus's name. A colonel looked at him like seeing a ghost. "Sergeant Kane, you're alive. We had you listed as KIA." "I was left behind," Marcus said simply. "I survived." The story came out. The delegation was shocked by the recordings, footage of his 6-month defense, his final battle, the Empress's declaration of sanctuary. Earth Alliance wanted him back. They offered medals, promotions, honors. Marcus turned them down. "I don't need your medals. I needed you 6 months ago when I was watching the last shuttle leave without me. Where were you then?" "We didn't know." "You didn't check. You filed paperwork and moved on. I was acceptable loss." He gestured to the Shelkin officers nearby. "They witnessed what I survived. They valued what I accomplished. They gave me sanctuary when I had nowhere else. My loyalty isn't to the military that forgot me, it's to the empire that saw my worth." The human delegation eventually departed without him. Marcus remained with the Shelkin as tactical consultant, as instructor, as the legendary human whose defense became required study for every military academy in the empire. Years later, the Empress visited him in the training facility where he was teaching defensive improvisation. Her skin colors were warm and pleased. After class, she approached. "You have found purpose here." "I have," Marcus agreed. "More than I ever had. Here my experience matters. My survival means something." "You were never statistical anomaly, Sergeant Kane. You were example of what a warrior can achieve when they refuse to accept defeat. That example has inspired thousands, has changed how we approach defensive warfare." She paused. "I witnessed you fighting alone against impossible odds, and I knew immediately that no army could match that resolve. That determination cannot be trained. It must be inherent. You possess it. And in recognizing it, in protecting you, my empire gained something invaluable. We gained living example of warrior excellence in purest form." Marcus smiled. "I was just trying not to die. And in trying not to die, you created legend that will outlive us both." Stories spread across galaxies about the lone human who earned the respect of an empire not through conquest but through impossible endurance. The Empress's skin shifted to deeply respectful colors. "That is your legacy, Marcus Kane. Not the soldier your people forgot, but the warrior an empire will remember forever." They stood together looking at the training grounds, at the next generation learning from the human who refused to surrender. Marcus realized that being left behind on Creshnell wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of something larger. He'd fought alone for 6 months, not for glory but because yielding was unthinkable. And in that lonely stand, he'd created something transcending his own survival. He demonstrated what was possible when a warrior absolutely refused to die. The Empress had witnessed his final battle and seen something worth preserving, worth protecting, worth incorporating into the heart of her empire's military tradition. Marcus Kane had been forgotten by his own people and left to die, but he'd been found by an empire that understood the value of what he'd achieved. And in their recognition, he'd found something he'd never had, acknowledgement that his worth went beyond following orders. He was Death's shadow, the lone defender of Outpost Zeta 7, the human who held when holding was impossible. And his legend would spread across the stars, carried by the empire that had witnessed his stand and been forever changed by watching one warrior refuse to accept defeat. Sometimes being forgotten is the beginning of being remembered.